Just a story about a botanist that finds himself in a hairy situation. Werewolf of London, released in 1935 and directed by Stuart Walker, is a groundbreaking film that paved the way for werewolf cinema. Starring Henry Hull as the tragic Dr. Glendon, this film spins the tale of a botanist who transforms into a werewolf after being bitten by a mysterious creature during an exhibition in Tibet. Werewolf of London holds the distinction of being Universal's original werewolf film, predating 1941's more famous The Wolfman by several years. While The Wolfman, starring Lon Chaney Jr., became the definitive werewolf film, Werewolf of London established many of the genre's conventions and introduced audiences to the tragic figure of the werewolf. Universal's decision to produce a werewolf film was part of their strategy to expand their movie monster portfolio, which included classics like Dracula and Frankenstein. The production of Werewolf of London was a major achievement for Universal Pictures. Already renowned for their monster movies, the film originally intended to star Boris Karloff, but the role went to Harry Hull, who brought a unique and restrained performance to the character as the tragic Dr. Wilfred Glendon. Hull, a seasoned actor, was also known for his roles in such films as The Lives of the Bengal Lancer and The Great Gatsby. His portrayal of Glendon brings a nuanced depth to the character, balancing both the scientist's intellectual demeanor and the beast's primal rage. Joining Hull is Warner Oland as Dr. Yogami, another botanist with a secret. Oland was famous for his role as Charlie Chan in numerous films during the 1930s. The supporting cast includes Valerie Hobson as Lisa Glendon, Glendon's concerned wife, who also starred in Bride of Frankenstein, solidifying her place in horror cinema. Stuart Walker, known for his work on Great Expectations, would direct the film, with a focus on creating an eerie and atmospheric horror experience. John Colton, the screenwriter, was a noteworthy playwright and screenwriter, with an knack for crafting compelling narratives. No discussion of Werewolf of London will be complete without mentioning the legendary Jack Pierce, the makeup artist behind the film's iconic werewolf transformation. Jack Pierce was a Greek-born makeup artist who worked on some of the most famous horror films of the 1930s and 40s. His career at Universal Pictures was marked by his innovative techniques and dedication to the craft. Pierce is best known for creating the iconic looks of Universal's monsters. Although his initial werewolf design for Henry Hull was deemed too frightening and was toned down to make the character more sympathetic, Werewolf of London was one of the first films to feature a transformation scene, a now iconic element of werewolf films. His meticulous attention to detail ensured that the transformation scenes were both convincing and terrifying. Pierce's legacy in the horror genre is immense, and his influence can be seen in the work of makeup artists to this day. At its core, Werewolf of London explores themes of transformation and the dual nature of humanity. Dr. Glendon's struggle with his beastly alter ego reflects the internal conflict between civilization and savagery. The film also delves into the themes of isolation and uncontrollable forces of nature, depicted through Glendon's increasing desperate attempts to retain his humanity. Upon its release, Werewolf of London received a mixed reception. While praised for its atmospheric direction and Hull's performance, it didn't achieve the same level of success as other Universal monster films like Dracula or Frankenstein. However, over the years, it has been reevaluated and is now considered a pioneering classic that's laid the groundwork for future werewolf films. The cultural impact of Werewolf of London is significant. Despite its initial reception, it introduced many of the tropes and visual elements that would become staples of werewolf cinema. Its influence can be seen in later films like The Wolfman in 1941, which further popularized the werewolf genre and solidified many of the conventions first seen in A Werewolf of London. The film remains a must-watch for horror fans and cinephiles. Its blend of early special effects, strong performances, and pioneering themes make it a cornerstone of werewolf cinema. Whether you're a first-time viewer or revisiting this classic, Werewolf of London offers a haunting glimpse into the origins of werewolf horror. The film opens up with Wilfred Glendon, a botanist who is in Tibet in search of the extremely rare plant called
Mariphasa lumina.
The plant is rumored to be nourished by the moon. Glendon and his assistant are greeted by a stranger who descends from the mountain.
You're the first white man we've seen in 3 months.
You two are the first I've seen in 40 years.
They learn that the place where the plant is located is dangerous and no man who's ever gone looking for it has ever returned.
I've never been into that valley, and I've never known a man to return from it.
After learning they're in the right location, the two, being very excited, thank the kind stranger for his words of wisdom before setting out to find the elusive flower.
You are foolish, but without fools, there would be no wisdom.
As they venture forth in search of the flower, Glendon's assistant begins having trouble walking, and later Glendon also experiences a strange encounter. All the while, the howls of wolves can be heard in the distance. Finding the flower, Glendon is attacked by a hairy man-beast. and is bitten, but manages to fight off the creature with his knife. And later we see the good doctor is recovered and is back in his London laboratory where he's begun working with the flower. We see Glendon has constructed a lamp that simulates moonlight and waits for the plant to bloom. Glendon's work is interrupted when he gets an alarm from his 1930s Ring doorbell. We then see the doctor's wife Lisa, who greets her moon-loving flower hubby. We learn that the doctor is late for his own party. His wife complains to him that he doesn't care about anything but that lab anymore, to which Glendon promises his wife that once this experiment is over, he'll get back to being normal again. We then are introduced to various party guests, including Paul Ames, who we learn was a former beau of Lisa. We then see some strange plants on display in Glendon's garden, including his very own sarlacc monster. Glendon is approached by a man named Dr. Yogami, who claims they met briefly in the dark while he was in Tibet and that they were both seeking the same flower. Yogami tells Glendon that the plant is a cure for what is called werewolfery, or lycanthrophobia.
This flower is an antidote for what? Werewolfery.
Glendon dismisses this as nonsense, of course. Yogami persists with his tale, claiming he knows of 2 such cases in London at this very moment. He then tells Glendon it's spread by the bite of another werewolf. But before the two can finish their conversation, they're interrupted by Lisa. Later we see Glendon back at his lab, hard at work, when he finally gets the flower to bloom. The doctor is taken aback when he notices that his new testosterone supplements are starting to work, as he begins rapidly growing hair on his hand. Talk about a case of hairy palms. Glendon prunes the newly bloomed flower and applies it to his hairy hand, amazed to see the hair quickly disappear. Not only has the doctor discovered how to make the plant bloom with fake moonlight, but he's also just invented werewolf nair. Later, we see Lisa and her former beau having tea. It looks like Ames is trying to slide on in on the doc's wife. Eddie then tells Lisa she's having a party and that they must come over. After Lisa tells Eddie there's no way Glendon will come, Eddie tells Lisa to leave him at home and bring Ames instead.
Oh, forget Wilfred. Why don't you invite Paul to stay on for dinner and let him drive you into town afterwards?
Dr. Yogami shows up, asking to see Glendon, but Lisa tells him that Wilfred is not seeing anyone today.
My husband is working on an experiment. He can't see anyone.
Before heading out the door, Eddie tells Yogami that she's having a big party and he must come.
You must come to my party tonight.
Not taking no for an answer, Yogami heads down to Wilfred's laboratory anyway. Yogami tells Glendon he needs 2 blossoms from the flower so he can save 2 souls, since the moon is full tonight.
2 blossoms of the Mariphasa flower in there would save 2 souls tonight.
Wilfred, being unwilling to go along with Yogami's werewolf nonsense, brushes it off as an old wives' tale. Before he goes, Yogami warns that the werewolves try to kill whoever they love most. Later that night, we see Wilfred in his study researching werewolf lore, where he learns that each night a werewolf must kill someone or they'll not be able to turn back. We also then get a quick shot of someone in Wilfred's lab stealing the flowers. Back in his study, we see Wilfred's wife Lisa, and Paul Ames shows up, and Lisa tries to convince Wilfred to go to the party, but the doc's not having any of it.
Darling, won't you change your mind and come with us?
I've listened to all the childhood memories I care to hear for one night.
So after Lisa and Paul head to the party, Wilfred starts changing into a werewolf. Now, seeing that all Yogami has told him is true, Wilfred heads down to the lab to use the flowers, but discovers they've been stolen. He does what any self-respecting werewolf would do, and he puts on his coat and hat and heads on out for a homicidal night on the town. Meanwhile, at Eddie's party, we're treated to some delightful music. And we see that Dr. Yogami has shown up, as well as Sir Thomas Forsyth, who is the head of Scotland Yard. Out on the balcony, we see Eddie and Yogami having a brief conversation when they hear the howls of a wolf on the night air. Frightened, Eddie heads back inside. We then get a glimpse of Wilfred lurking in the shadowy streets in search of his first victim. Back at the party, Lisa and Paul help a drunk Eddie into bed.
Eddie Coombs, what's the matter with you?
Downstairs, the other guests begin to hear howling, which some of the partygoers write it off as a dog. However, Yogami assures them it's no dog.
It isn't a dog.
I say, you're trembling.
We then see Wilfred climbing up in Eddie's room, where she awakes to see the terrifying image of the werewolf. She lets out a blood-curdling scream that can be heard by all the partygoers downstairs. The guests make their way into Eddie's room, where she tells them the hairy green-eyed devil was trying to claw at her.
Oh, the devil's been here. He had green eyes. He clawed at me.
But Paul and Thomas dismiss her claims as drunken hallucinations.
I think our hostess has been mixing her drinks a little, don't you?
I think that's a very excellent deduction.
After failing to make a meal out of Eddie, we see Wilfred back in the London streets, where he attacks a poor woman on an evening stroll. The next morning, the news of a vicious attack spreads across London, sending waves of panic throughout the city. We see Dr. Yogami reading the newspaper as he discovers the outcome of Wilfred's late-night stroll. We also see that he was also the one behind the flower theft, and that he has used one of the blossoms to keep himself from turning. Meanwhile, back at Sir Thomas's office, we see them discussing last night's grisly murder.
You heard the cries and you ran off in the direction from which they appeared to come.
Yes, sir. And blood-curdling they was.
Paul suggests that if the killer is not an actual wolf, perhaps it's a werewolf.
How about a werewolf, then?
This is Scotland Yard, my boy, not Grimm's fairy tales.
He then tells Sir Thomas that when he was in the Yucatan, the villagers told tales of a series of attacks very similar to the one that just happened last night. Then he goes on to tell him that the villagers shot some strange creature that was slinking in the hills, and then the attack stopped. We then cut to Wilfred and Lisa having morning tea, where Wilfred sees the headlines in the paper from last night's attack. Lisa then tells Wilfred that Paul wants the two of them to go on a late-night drive this evening. At first, Wilfred says no, but after Lisa questions what's wrong with him, he quickly tells Lisa he loves her and that he'll go on the ride with them. Later in his lab, Wilfred is unable to get the last bloom to open. After telling his lab assistant Hawkins to stay and watch over the flower, he heads out to Lisa and tells her he can't go on the car ride tonight and that she can't go either. Lisa, refusing to listen, heads off anyway with her former beau on a late-night cruise. We then see that Wilfred has went out of town and taken up residence in a small inn where he attempts to hide out the night, but as the moon rises, it's no use. He transforms back into a werewolf and busts out the window, escaping into the night, where he makes his way to a local zoo. Wilfred then spots the night guard who's having a late-night rendezvous with his mistress. When the guard goes to check on all the commotion with the wolves, Wilfred attacks the mistress, making her his second victim. With no more flowers left, Dr. Yogami heads to Sir Thomas's office, where he tells him and Paul that the flowers are an antidote for werewolfery. Once again, Sir Thomas brushes off the werewolf business as just fairy tales, but Yogami warns him that London will face an epidemic if they don't get that flower soon. We then go back to Wilfred's lab, where we see the flower still refusing to bloom. Wilfred then tells Hawkins to tell no one that he was there, and he has to go away for a while. Wilfred heads up to the childhood home of his dear wife Lisa, where the groundskeeper locks him up for the night in one of the old abandoned rooms in the estate. We then see that Lisa and Paul are out for another one of those evening night drives. They stop by her old home to reminisce about the good old days. When Paul professes his love to Lisa, but Lisa tells Paul she's not interested.
You promised you wouldn't. We've been through it all before. It's no use.
We then see Wilfred is transformed once again back into a werewolf. He sees Paul and Lisa outside, so Wilfred breaks out of the tower and attacks Lisa and Paul. After an intense brawl, Paul is able to fight off Wilfred and escape with Lisa. The next day, Paul tells Sir Thomas that he is sure that the creature he was attacked by was none other than Dr. Wilfred Glendon. But as the two are discussing the matter, they learn that there was another similar attack last night that was over 150 miles away, and there was no way that Wilfred could have been in both places. As the two investigate the newest attack, they discover that it took place in a room being rented out by Dr. Yogami. And Paul also discovers two mysterious flowers. The two of them then head to Wilfred's place to get to the bottom of it, but once they get there, there's no sign of Wilfred. We then see Wilfred has been hiding out in a secret room under his house. After learning that from Hawkins that the flower is about to bloom, he dismisses Hawkins, asking him to tell no one that they ever saw him. Down in the lab, Wilfred sees the flower has bloomed, but once his back is turned, we see that Dr. Yogami steals the last bloom and uses it on himself. We learn that Yogami is the werewolf that bit Wilfred.
Yogami, you brought this on me.
Learning this, Wilfred attacks Yogami in the scuffle. Wilfred transforms back into his werewolf form and kills Yogami. Wilfred then breaks loose, goes on a rampage through the house where he corners Lisa. Wilfred is about to strike when in the last second, Sir Thomas busts in and shoots Wilfred. Before dying, Wilfred thanks Sir Thomas for releasing him from his curse and tells Lisa that he's sorry and he loves her. Then after dying, Sir Thomas tells Lisa in his report he'll state that he shot Wilfred by mistake while trying to save Lisa.
In my report I shall say that I shot him by accident while he was trying to protect his wife.
And there you have it, horror freaks, a classic tale of terror and tragedy. Werewolf of London a lot of times goes under the radar when you think about Universal monster films, but don't sleep on this little tale of werewolfery, especially if the moon is full. Well, that does it for this episode. Let me know your thoughts on the film. Do you think it stands the test of time, or has the moon went down on this one? Until next time, stay stiff.